Hello and welcome aboard another episode of the Gallant Says podcast. It is Thursday, January 11th of 2024, live at youtube.com/Paul Gallant, twitch.tv/Gallant Says, on Twitter and or X at Gallant Says, Instagram at Sports Gallant, Facebook at Paul Gallant Sports. You can catch it live Monday and Thursday evenings, and occasionally after major Houston sporting events. It's also available wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and SoundCloud after the fact. And if you ever have a question, you can send me an email at gallantsays@gmail.com. Going to cover a couple of different things today. Very busy day for me. Pete Carroll, who I covered in Seattle, he and the Seahawks split up on Wednesday. I grew up going to Patriots games and worshiping Bill Belichick. He and the Patriots split up on Thursday. But let's start by talking about the thing that I currently cover on a daily basis, seeing as I work over at ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. Your Houston Texans are going to host the Cleveland Browns Saturday, 3:30 at a sold-out NRG Stadium. Cleveland is currently 3-point favorites per mybookie.ag. You can enter promo code BET975 for an awesome deposit bonus. Sunday is a sellout. I'm very curious going to NRG Stadium if it is going to be as rowdy an atmosphere as it was going back to 2011 when things got to a ridiculously loud level, when J.J. Watt had that pick six on Andy Dalton. Also the 2012 season, the game played in 2012 for the J.J. Watt pick six. 2013 for the next year that the Houston Texans played their Saturday afternoon special against Cincinnati. Also very loud that day. That was my first playoff game that I got to go to. I didn't get to go to the one the year before. I'm hoping it's going to be loud. I think there have been some moments this season where the NRG Stadium crowd has been fun, has been lively, but at the same time, there's also been some games where there's been more Steelers fans than Texans fans, Broncos fans than Texans fans, Browns fans than Texans fans, Saints fans than Texans fans. Like, it's not been great. So I'm hoping it's going to be different. And they did sell out, so there's a pretty good chance it'll be different. But I do wonder how many people will be traversing from Cleveland to watch the game. Anyway, at the beginning of the week, I wasn't feeling particularly confident about the Texans matchup with Cleveland. Even with C.J. Stroud back, I think the average NFL fan looks at the Browns, looks at what they have been doing despite a less than ideal quarterback situation, no Nick Chubb, injuries on their offensive line at tackle. But here they are, a team that's been pretty damn good this regular season, a team that kicked the Houston Texans' ass on Christmas Eve, 36-22. The score was nowhere close to representing how one-sided that game actually was. But hey, there was no C.J. Stroud in that game. Quarterback matchup, if it's all about the quarterbacks, the Texans clearly have the better quarterback. But it's a rookie quarterback going up against a guy in Joe Flacco who is 5-0 wild card weekend, who has 7 career road wins in the playoffs. And no matter what you want to say about when those wins took place, they did happen. Even if he is older, turns the football over a little bit more, gets sacked a little bit more. Like, that's definitely a factor. But today, Thursday, I don't think things possibly could have trended in a better direction for the Texans over the course of the last couple of hours. Now, one thing I think we should note, Derek Stingley, I have a YouTube video up about this, is Defensive Player of the Month, because over the course of the last month, quarterbacks have a 1.7 rating when throwing against him, which is incredible. But the other reason things are trending up is because the injury report for the Houston Texans today could not have been better. Seriously, it could not have been better. First of all, Robert Woods and Noah Brown, dealing with a hip injury and a back injury, practiced today. Will they play on Sunday? I don't know. They're listed as questionable. But on Saturday, the Houston Texans were basically stuck working with Nico Collins, who balled, along with Dalton Schultz carrying things, and on top of Dalton Schultz, John Mechie, who hasn't been very good this year, and Xavier Hutchinson, who is a late-round draft pick, also a rookie. You're not expecting much from those guys. If the Texans have a full arsenal of weapons for CJ Stroud, that should make his job easier. We've seen Noah Brown go off a couple of times this year. Robert Woods is certainly a capable wide receiver in the NFL, and that should theoretically open things up on the ground for the Texans and Devin Singletary. Hasn't been as easy for Devin Singletary the last couple of weeks, really since that game against the Tennessee Titans, as it had been earlier in the year. The better news, though, for the Houston Texans comes off of defense, because both Will Anderson and Jonathan Grenard practiced today on a limited basis. But hey, they practiced, and Jonathan Grenard said he's good to go. No Jerry Hughes. All three of these guys are dealing with ankle injuries. Does make you wonder about the general states of football fields across the NFL. But these guys look like they're going to be able to play. And considering Joe Flacco was only sacked once in that Christmas Eve game, you'd think that they would be able to get to him a little bit more. After all, 46 sacks. That's the most sacks the Texans have had in franchise history. Obviously, it's a 17-game season now. Obviously, since we've moved to 17 games, things have not been good for the Texans. They haven't exactly been able to pin their ears back, if you will, and then run straight after the quarterback every single game. But they did set a record this year, largely due to the fact that Jonathan Grenard's been damn good, 12.5 sacks in a contract year, and Will Anderson's a front runner for Defensive Rookie of the Year. They're both back on the field when Anderson did not play the last time around against the Browns, and Grenard had to leave early the last time around against the Browns. That makes you feel like they're going to be able to get some sacks in this game. And making things even better for the Houston Texans in this game, the victories keep on coming. The Browns, who are already banged up, who already are starting Joe Flacco, have been without Amari Cooper since that Christmas Eve game where Cooper caught 265 yards worth of receptions against the Texans. He's expected to play in this game, though, but he hasn't played since that game. Maybe he's a little bit rusty. The Browns have already lost 3 offensive tackles to injury this year. They've had some issues on the offensive line. Jaron Christian is their left tackle. He was on the Texans for 1 game earlier this year with all the injuries they were dealing with. He's had 9 starts since then with Cleveland. The right tackle, James Hudson, also not a full season starter. He's been starting the last 7 games. Next man up at this point. I'm sure that they're serviceable, all things considered, seeing as the Browns continue to win with Joe Flacco and Flacco continues to put up numbies. But, hey, that should be a matchup that Will Anderson and Jonathan Grenard win more often than against most other tackles in the league, right? And then on top of all of that, the Browns are having the same kind of shitty injury like the Texans are. Denzel Ward injured his knee in practice today, and it's unclear if he's going to be ready to go for Saturday. Add on top of that, that Brown safety Grant Delpit, who started 13 games, all 13 that he played this year, he's out. And kicker Dustin Hopkins is out. I hate making predictions. I think the Houston Texans have been close to impossible to predict this season. Is that a reflection of a rookie head coach? It might be. They're one of the most penalized teams in the NFL. That's been an issue specifically the last couple of weeks. But with the health that all of a sudden seems to be a blessing for the Houston Texans, with all of the guys that theoretically are coming back from injury, and with the Browns all of a sudden dealing with some injuries, I definitely think this game is going to be different than the last time these two teams played on Christmas Eve, which again was a super fucking one-sided game. And the Browns are still 3-point favorites. Maybe Vegas knows something I don't. But if I have to make a pick right now about who's going to just straight up win on Saturday, I'm picking the Texans because they're getting healthier. The Browns are getting more banged up. And it's CJ Stroud against Joe Flacco. Sometimes you just got to keep it simple. Could the Texans blow it? Absolutely. They lost to the Panthers this season. They lost to the Jets this season. They lost to the Falcons this season. They've had some horrible losses, but those losses took place on the road. They're a lot better at home, even in front of a crowd that's not often always all Houston Texans fans. So I'm picking the Texans to win on Saturday. If you have any thoughts, you can join youtube.com/Paul Gallant or twitch.tv/Gallant says. Adam Arriaga comments, youtube.com/Paul Gallant. In CJ I Trust. Hackashack comments, PG for American Prime Minister. I do not want to be a politician ever. I don't. I know as soon as I become a politician, someone would dig up something from the past potentially, and the next thing I know, I would be canceled and have to go into hiding or something like that. Hackashack also comments, youtube.com/Paul Gallant, went from CJ and Nico against the Browns, amazing D, to all the weapons against the depleted Cleveland secondary in one day. Yep, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So you got to be feeling pretty good about the Houston Texans' chances on Saturday. And as the week has progressed, I've been feeling better and better. That also might be a byproduct of me getting more and more excited for this game that's taking place on Saturday. Poor Marine comments, twitch.tv/Gallant says, I'm sorry, Paulie, but that stadium, NRG Stadium, and the setup for sound is poor at best. Yeah, for concerts. That place can get very, very loud. I disagree with that. Poor Marine also wants me to make some great emojis on Twitch. Fuck that. There's not enough people that watch on Twitch. Most of the people who are watching are on YouTube. Sorry, Twitters! Hackashack comments, Sting's allowed passer rating reminds me of my freshman year GPA. Damn, 1.7? That's still bueno. You got to do better than that. Rick Hagwood says, howdy, y'all. Howdy to you. Poor Marine saying it's going to be the Browns in a blowout. I don't know about that. Brandon Cruz says, Mike Florio chose us. Finally, one person gave respect. Do you want Mike Florio to be picking you? I don't know about that. Anyway, guys, I want to touch on a couple of other things that have happened over the course of the last 48 hours in the world of sports. For those who don't know, my last job was in Seattle, where I covered the Seattle Seahawks, and where on a regular basis, I interviewed Pete Carroll the day after every single Seahawks game, working at the Seahawks flagship station at the time. I like to think that Pete Carroll and I developed a solid rapport. I don't know, take this Zoom press conference during the pandemic as an example of our clear friendship.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to say, and I haven't even asked the question yet.
Did you hear my media laugh in the background? I'm ashamed that I laughed at that. But I really came to enjoy Pete Carroll. And in those 2 years, did I get to know him as a human being? No. Did he lie to me a couple of times in these interviews? Yes. But no matter how you feel about him, the man, the at times tinfoil hatter, the coach, I would just encourage you to go watch the introduction to Pete Carroll's press conference, where he announced that, not voluntarily, after a discussion with Seahawks ownership, but he didn't want to do it. He did, as he always says, compete to stick around. He had an awesome introduction to that press conference. It's the first 11 minutes and 30 seconds. He got emotional on a level I've never seen him. He teared up a couple of times. And he thanks everyone along the way. Players, former players, coaches, former coaches, staffers, his family. And I do think that's who he is. I think that most people would tell you that Pete Carroll is a good dude. That was my impression of him Yes, from in-person interviews with him and then interviews over Zoom during the pandemic, but I thought he was a good guy. Pete Carroll, for those who don't know, this is, I think, what everybody thinks of him. He's an absurdly energetic, almost annoyingly positive person, which is unique among football coaches. And it's funny because he's an old guy that's so positive and energetic. He's 72 years and 114 days during the Seahawks season finale when they beat the Cardinals. That was the fourth oldest coach ever to coach an NFL game. He was the oldest coach in the NFL before this went down. And still, relentless positivity to, yes, the point of being annoying. And on top of that relentless positivity, so much energy that I hope I have when I'm in my 70s. At times, I feel like I don't have as much as he does right now. And for those who don't know, I mean, I've been following Pete Carroll for a while. The first ever football game that I went to, you can see it in the background here. See that above me over there? I'm pointing at it right now. That is a towel that I got before the first football game that I ever went to, August 31st, 1997. It was Patriots-Chargers. The Patriots were the defending AFC champions, and it was Pete Carroll's first game as head coach of my favorite team. I have this VHS tape, Meeting the Challenge, the official team video of the 1998 New England Patriots. They went 10-6. They beat the Dolphins and Dan Marino the first round of the playoffs. They lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers 7-6 in the second round of the playoffs. And it was Pete Carroll's first year as head coach of the Patriots. It was his second go-round in the NFL as a head coach. He never had a losing season. 10-6, 9-7. 8-8 in the 3 years he was there. The last year in particular was really frustrating because they started off the year 6-2, had a bye week, and they finished this year 2-6. He gets fired. Bill Belichick gets hired. We'll talk about Bill Belichick a little bit later. And after that, years later, after a stint at USC, after a stint at with the Seahawks for a while, I mean, he'd been there for 10 years at that point in time. All of a sudden, I find myself a couple of games into the year doing in-person interviews with Pete Carroll. I didn't know that was something I was going to be doing. And then all of a sudden, like, I find out first week on the job, oh yeah, you're going to be interviewing Pete Carroll not once, but twice in the first week. They had a Sunday game against the Cardinals, interviewed him that day, met him for the first time. Clearly, he had not been told that he was going to have new people interviewing him. And then a couple of days later in the week, the Seahawks play the Rams in Thursday Night Football. Once again, I'm doing the interview with him. And it was in that interview where I told him, like, hey, like, yo, first Patriots game I ever went to, you were the head coach. I always thought you did a good job. I was actually upset when he got fired. And I was surprised they fired him. I was like, they didn't have a losing record. There's just a lot of injuries and a lot of bullshit going on. So despite a less than ideal way to start things off, where he wasn't even told about it clearly, I felt like he was extremely gracious with what will ultimately be the most access that I ever get to a relevant sports figure in my life. I will never get the ability to sit down on a weekly basis and interview a head coach who's won multiple college national championships and a Super Bowl. Again, that won't happen. There's only 3 that have done that. It's just Jimmy Johnson, Barry Switzer, and Pete Carroll. And here I was, a little starstruck as firsts. Then eventually, like, you watch him coaching these games and you realize, okay, well, he's a human being. He makes lots of mistakes that drove lots of Seahawks fans crazy. But he could not have been, I think, more patient with me. Which, when you're somebody that's doing a weekly interview with a radio host and radio hosts are disagreeing with your opinion, second-guessing you, I mean, that's got to be a little bit annoying. I enjoyed getting to interview him so much that I actually wrote him a thank you note when I got canned. I don't know if he got it, but I did send it out, and I was trying to figure out a way to reach out to him yesterday through whatever contact I could. this is a guy in Pete Carroll who regularly was dismissed, was overlooked in terms of his ability. And that's also something that I find interesting given his track record. With New England, when he came to the Patriots, okay, I can understand why people are second-guessing him. He's replacing Bill Parcells, who's one of the best coaches in NFL history. And you go from this sarcastic hard ass to this rah positivity guy. I saw an interview that Bill Simmons did with Willie McGinnis back in 2017, and he said this about him. He had more energy, to say the least, or more of a happy rah type attitude. His coaching style was different. The way he talked and the way he approached things was totally different. He didn't rule with an iron fist. Some guys took advantage of the way Pete was. They didn't respect it. They didn't do what they needed to do, which is a shame. He respected men enough and their craft enough to think, yeah, they should do their job. I shouldn't have to be on their case. I shouldn't have to be yelling at them all the time. I'm going to support them as best I can. I'm going to tell them to do their job. I'm going to tell them to compete hard. And it was such a, I think, culture clash with the last head coach that it just wasn't going to work out. So when Carroll left and Bill Belichick comes in, Belichick a lot more similar to Bill Parcells before him. Obviously, he worked with him. It actually works out. So he gets canned by the Patriots. And from 1999 through 2000, he's a consultant. And USC hires him in December of 2000. Gave him a 5-year contract. They had just gotten rid of Paul Hackett. And USC was not USC at this moment in time. He was considered a long shot to be USC's next head coach. He was not their first choice. They pursued Dennis Erickson from Oregon State, Oregon coach Mike Bellotti, Chargers coach Mike Riley. And isn't it so funny to think, like, they went with their fourth choice, the best choice they possibly could have made. But Pete Carroll was USC's fourth choice. Imagine what would have happened if they hired any of those guys. Because he changes college football forever in his tenure at USC from 2000 to 2009. Wins 2 national titles, goes to the other one against Texas, and did a hell of a job recruiting. Because guess what? Like, a personality like that is perfect for college football. Hell, it was avant-garde. It's not a guy yelling. It's a guy that's your bro, essentially. Obviously, there was some scandal happening at USC, so he goes to Seattle, and people were second-guessing that as well, because they were wondering if he was just trying to dodge all of the incoming sanctions. But he starts with the Seahawks in 2010, and they were competitive the first couple of seasons. They go 7-9. The Beastquake happens in 2010. 2011, they're 7-9. But 2012, they get Russell Wilson, and everything takes off from there. They go to back-to-back Super Bowls. They win one of them, and they're stopped short on the 1-yard line. And through it all, the guy still was getting second-guessed. Russell Wilson bitching about not being allowed to do as much as he wanted. Richard Sherman bitching about, like, Pete Carroll's view of him at the very end, and about how Russell Wilson was getting preferential treatment. A very polarized Seahawks fan base, half of which seems to have wanted him fired annually, starting from the Malcolm Butler interception on. And despite all of that, with me, with Seattle media, with Seahawks fans, he showed an unbelievable amount of patience. And he's a human. Of course he's going to be annoyed by all the second guessing that he was getting. But this is a guy who was way ahead of the curve when it comes to dealing with the modern athlete. Because I think back in the day, growing up, you're playing high school sports or something like that, a coach tells you to do something, you do it. They tell you to jump, you ask how high. These days now, I think most people ask authority figures why. And Carroll was one of the first ones to work with players like that. And as he said in that the introduction to his farewell press conference, he constantly talked about how it's not about the coaches, it's not about the owners, it's not about the uniforms, this sport, football specifically, is about the players. And the amount of respect that Pete Carroll has shown to players over the course of his coaching career, there are very few who showed more. And I think the results that came as a result of that respect, the winning, always being a competitive team in Seattle, even at the very end after getting rid of Russell Wilson, always being competitive with the Patriots, always being competitive at USC. He's ultimately one of the most impactful coaches in football of the 21st century and one of the best coaches in the history of the sport. I don't think there's any debating that. I wish Pete Carroll the best. I'm really thankful I got to speak with him on a weekly basis and work with him. And I hope that he wasn't too annoyed by me. Also, we got to talk about my favorite coach ever, the greatest coach in the history of sports, Bill Belichick. I was doing my radio show today, and I knew that the Bill Belichick retirement or parting of ways or whatever the fuck, it was on the horizon, but there were reports that they were going to part ways. And then all of a sudden I look up on the television that we have in our radio studio, and it's Bill Belichick at a podium, smirking a bit with Patriots owner Bob Kraft. They hugged at the end. And fuck, man. Didn't really hit me until I saw them both standing at the podium. You can't debate this. Belichick's the greatest coach in NFL history. I think he's the greatest coach in sports history. He was the leader of the greatest dynasty in sports history. 19 years, 17 division title, a undefeated regular season. Only one coach has done that in a 16-game slate. 13 AFC championship appearances, 9 AFC championship victories, 9 Super Bowl appearances, 6 Super Bowl victories. And yeah, all 19 of those came with Tom Brady, and the 5 years, the 4 years since and the 1 year before, obviously, were not great. But it's been weird to see with the Patriots collapse at the end of the year, and honestly just throughout this past season. It's been very annoying to see the amount of revisionist history about Bill Belichick from people who seem like they're 20 years old. A lot of people seem to be arguing that Belichick deserves little to no credit entirely because he had Tom Brady as his quarterback. And, you know, to what we were saying with Pete Carroll a little bit earlier, Pete Carroll's right. It's all about the players, but people seem to forget that it was Bill Belichick who was the one that felt comfortable turning to Tom Brady and then sticking with Tom Brady at 3 separate junctures. They did not cut him when he was the 4th quarterback on the roster in 2000. They had 4 quarterbacks in 2000. Michael Bishop, John Freese, and Drew Bledsoe, who they had just signed to an $100 million contract. Bledsoe gets injured. Brady comes in. Brady plays pretty well. Not great. There was a moment where the Patriots were 5-5 after a loss to the St. Louis Rams, who they would eventually beat in the Super Bowl that year. And after that game, Belichick decides, instead of going back to a healthy Drew Bledsoe, who was pissed off about it, he went to Tom Brady. Brady throws for 4 touchdown passes in the rain at a game that I went to at Foxborough Stadium. They win that game. They win the rest of the games the rest of the way. After the Super Bowl, Brady obviously led the Patriots on a last-minute field goal drive. But it's not like Brady was so good in that game that you would think to yourself it's a foregone conclusion that the Patriots are going to go with Tom Brady the next season. For Bill Belichick, maybe an easier decision. But, I mean, they had just given him an $100 million contract. And the third time that Belichick chose to stick with Brady, maybe an easier decision, was right after that Super Bowl was played. Brady threw for 18 touchdowns and 12 interceptions that year. And there's this weird revisionist history that seems to be going on that the Patriots won Super Bowl 36 because of Tom Brady. No, they won because they ran the football well. They won because they were awesome on defense. And they won because they were really fundamentally sound, specifically on special teams. And you take a look at the Patriots' 3 Super Bowls that they won in 4 years, including the back-to-back Super Bowls, which no team has done since, from the 03-04 season, the 04-05 season. It's Belichick's defensive sorcery that deserves the majority of the credit for those victories. Obviously, Tom Brady played well, but Tom Brady did not become the Tom Brady that we know as one of the greatest quarterbacks in the game until 2007, where the Patriots went undefeated in the regular season, and Brady set the touchdown record for a season. When he's working with Randy Moss and he's working with Wes Welker. And after that point in time, okay, if you really want to say Tom Brady deserves the majority of the credit going forward for the Patriots, fine. But remember, every single Patriot team that won a Super Bowl after that had a great defense that was designed and put together by Bill Belichick, who was not just the head coach, he was the roster builder of this team. And he was constantly adapting his team, the way that they played, to the style that he could make happen with the personnel he had. And he also was the kind of coach that wasn't just going to throw the same thing out there week in, week out, which is what the Houston Texans did a lot 2011, 2012 with Gary Kubiak and Wade Phillips. He changed his game plan week to week. And it helps to have a quarterback like Tom Brady. You can actually do things like that. But they didn't win by playing just one style. That's how every single team should operate. Good quarterback or bad quarterback. And you can't deny that his marriage with Tom Brady, another football savant, is the reason for his success. Those two pushed each other in a way that very few quarterbacks would push a coach. And the same thing with the coach who believed in this quarterback. But Belichick was the best coach in football history. I don't think it's debatable. And I'm sure some people are going to bring up the cheating, Spygate, all of that shit. And you just will never be able to convince me, someone who, like Astros fans studying all the sign-stealing stuff, is way more informed on all this than you are. You can't convince me it was as big of a deal as it was made out to be. You just can't. Jimmy Johnson did it. Jimmy Johnson admitted to this on Radio Row in an interview with WFAN in 2008. When asked about Bill Belichick and spying, Jimmy Johnson admits that he used to use signs that he recorded on video to steal all the time. I've said it on our show, said Jimmy Johnson. 18 years ago, a scout for the Chiefs told me what they did. And he said, what you need to do is just take your camera, you go and zoom in on the signal caller, and that way you can sync it up. The problem is that if they're not on the press box side, you can't do it from the press box. You have to do it from the sideline. This was 18 years ago, and that's why the Patriots got in trouble. Johnson said that the Patriots were wrong for doing it for the simple reason that the league knew it was going on. He knew it was going on and knew it was going on around the league, and they sent out a memo, much like the Astros got that memo for the sign-stealing stuff. But Johnson went further to say, I stole signals. This is a 2-time Super Bowl champion with the Cowboys, saying, oh, yeah, I did it with video, and so did a lot of other teams in the league. You want to know another one? Mike Shanahan, head coach of the Broncos, who coincidentally won 2 Super Bowls in the 90s. Mike Shanahan. Back then, everybody was trying to steal signals. Some of the best quarterbacks in the league had different cue cards from the sideline, depending on the defense or blitz, and tried to do everything they could. They looked at videotaping for a lot of years and came up with a final verdict. I could go back and tell you 100 different stories. John Madden, in the middle of a 1992 broadcast between the Redskins and Cowboys, said that, yeah, they would try to steal the signals of other teams during a broadcast. Wow, why not? Bill Cowher admitted it was common practice for teams to videotape others looking to steal signals. So the issue with Spygate when it happened was not about the recording of the signs. It was about the location of the recording of the signs. You weren't allowed to do it from the sideline. These plays were not being, back in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, due to the technology available, you could not relay the video so quickly in the middle of the game and all of a sudden decipher what the other team was doing. Like this would take like a week in a rematch for this to happen. And still, if a play is coming, you still have to like actually stop the play. Obviously, it's a little easier when you know what's coming, but the Spygate scandal was definitely the Patriots violating the rules. But it was blown up to a proportion that, just based off of the success that they continue to have after, it should never have been blown up to. I will say that until the day that I die. You can't convince me otherwise, because I have spent way too much time looking it up. So there you go, guys. All right, let's read some comments here. Some more comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Twitch.tv/Gallant says, to go back to the Texans and the Browns game. JAM says the Texans defense is going to have 2 pick sixes. Well, with the way Derek Stingley is playing, that could possibly happen. Steven Nelson, can he do that? Tiff says that's asking too much from the Texans defense. I don't know about that. I mean, Flacco turns the football over. 8 interceptions in 5 games. I think as far as turnover-worthy plays, Flacco has had 8. So he could have had 8 interceptions. He could have had, I guess, more interceptions than the 8 that he's already thrown. Saw that from VT, a brown chubby bear on Twitter. Tiff. I hope the Texans defense can stop the Browns from scoring touchdowns. That's a good call. Work Dude says, let's effing go Texans, I believe. JAM says Joe Flacco is good for 3 interceptions. Well, you would hope so with the offensive line the way that it is right now. Hackershack says Caserio needs to reach out to Belichick, and at the risk of insulting him with the work, ask him what he wants to get back to his roots and become the Texans defensive coordinator. I would fucking love that. Brandon Cruz agrees with that. That would be really funny. If Bill Belichick was defensive coordinator of the Texans, working under D'Amico Ryans, I really wonder what's going to be next for Belichick and what coaches, what organization is going to want to bring him in. Rick Hagewood says something that I said on my radio show today. The old guard coaching hierarchy is out the door. The times, they are changing. That's right. I don't think you can be a hard ass anymore. I think you have to incorporate analytics in some way, shape, or form, and you got to be open to cooperation. And it does seem like coaches ultimately become control freaks that have a tough time working with others. On Twitch, twitch.tv/Gallant says, CJ gets a concussion. Texans lose. Kerry takes over ownership. Does D'Amico Ryans bounce? Jesus Christ. Please, none of those things happen. Imagine another CJ Stroud concussion. Stop putting that bad energy out there. Bleed Blue says, Gallant says, is the least interactive show on. Hey, I said I was going to talk about Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick today, so fuck off. Last comment of the show. Luis Salas says, if the Texans score more points than the Browns, they'll win. I think you're right, Luis. I think you're right. And on that note, guys, that's going to wrap up today's edition of the Gallant Says podcast. You can catch this in podcast form a little bit later. I think we had some issues with the OBS broadcast translation over to YouTube, so we didn't get as many people in here as we traditionally do. I'm kind of pissed off about that, but shit happens. We appreciate everybody who has joined this. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe on YouTube. Every little bit helps. Also do the same thing on Twitch if you're a first timer, to twitch.tv/Gallant Says. I'm also on Twitter at Gallant Says, on TikTok at that same thing if you want to see mini show clips after the fact. Instagram at Sports Gallant, and on Facebook at Paul Gallant Sports. I only post this show to Facebook in long form. I'll be honest, fuck Facebook. But hey, if you're on it, you do have a way to watch the show. It's on Monday nights, Thursday nights, and after major Houston sporting events, and available wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And if you ever have a question, shoot me an email, gallantsays@gmail.com. Luis Salas says, thanks for not spilling water today. Shauna Tonin says, I have the Texans winning on a defensive stop. I just got here. Why are you leaving right now? Because I got to go to the gym, and this 24-hour fitness that I go to closes at 10. It makes no fucking sense. I got to get checked. Tune into the radio show tomorrow. So long. Farewell. Have yourselves a wonderful Thursday. Go Texans on